Greetings, my name's Guy Dauncey. This is the show Change the World, where for half an hour I invite guests on who share my passion for positive vision, for positive solutions, for doing something in a big, bold way instead of just moaning and groaning. My guest today is my good friend Elizabeth May. Welcome.
Thank you, Guy.
And Elizabeth May is leader of the Green Party of Canada, prominent lawyer, author, officer of the Order of Canada, mother, grandmother.
Yes.
Before becoming an MP, you were executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada for many years, and then you won your seat as Canada's first Green Party MP in 2011, representing Saanich Gulf Islands. And I need to say for viewers that I have supported the Green Party both financially and in person before, so I'm in full conflict of interest here.
Yeah. But you don't always support the Green Party.
I support the NDP as well. I'm very strategic. Yes.
Or non-strategic while thinking you're strategic. I will throw that in there.
So I'm sure I upset you sometimes as well.
That's right. Just to make it clear to viewers, you're not solidly in a green camp. No.
Yes. So because there's so many things we could talk about, we have decided we're going to talk about oil pipelines and Kinder Morgan specifically, right?
Yeah.
Which you've been engaged in for a long time.
Yeah, I was an intervener before the National Energy Board. There were, speaking of Greens, I'm really proud of the fact that there were only 3 people associated with any political parties, elected people, who were final argument presenters to the National Energy Board. There was me, as a member of Parliament, Andrew Weaver as leader of the Green Party of BC, and future MLA Adam Olsen. And what was cool about our argumentation was my background is as a lawyer. I dug in and studied all of that process, and I put forward a legal argument for how the National Energy Board could not rule that Kinder Morgan had made its case because it hadn't. Legal argument. Andrew Weaver made, as a scientist, the scientific argument, and Adam Olsen made a really clear and cogent argument on Indigenous rights. And it was, none of us talked to each other ahead of time about how we were divvying it up, but we made a good case. Unfortunately, the NEB wasn't listening.
So let's assume that we have viewers who are sitting on the fence, who are just not sure about this. They say, well, we all need oil, we all drive cars, Alberta's got to have an economy. What's the thrust of the case against the Kinder Morgan pipeline?
Well, there's actually no case for the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which is something which surprised people. There's been no independent analysis of whether it will create more jobs than it kills. A lot of Canadians are surprised when I tell them that the largest union in northern Alberta, Unifor, testified and intervened, as I did, in the process before the National Energy Board. And the largest union was arguing against the pipeline because I said this will cost more jobs in Canada than it can create. And that's because the argument is if you're going to maximize jobs, it's the same argument with raw logs. A lot of viewers will know that we lose our chance to get our sawmills operating full tilt if logs are shipped out to China without the chance of putting them through the mill, getting 2x4s, and then maybe getting furniture, and ultimately maybe building, making violins. You need the raw material.
So the Unifor union workers in Alberta are arguing against the pipeline.
Absolutely.
Because
it's the same thing as shipping out raw logs. Shipping out raw bitumen means fewer jobs in Canada because you're skipping value added. You're shipping it out as a solid thing called bitumen. And in order to have refineries that can accept this product, you have to first upgrade it. And that was the plan under Peter Lougheed. If you go back, if you're an Albertan now living around here, boy, I so respect Peter Lougheed. What he tried to do with the development of the oil sands was set the money aside in a sovereign wealth fund and make sure Peter Lougheed's #1 rule was think like an owner.
Or think like a Norwegian, I should say.
No, the Norwegians took his idea.
Oh,
it's the other way around. The Norwegian government went to Alberta and studied Peter Lougheed's plan. They implemented it. Ralph Klein scrapped it.
So I can't not put this in, but Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which comes from oil, is now $1 trillion in size, and Norway's only, 5 million people? Well,
what it comes to is that every Norwegian has more than $1 million there within the sovereign wealth fund as the North Sea oil dwindles. And Norway brought in a carbon tax at the same time they started developing their offshore oil.
But let's stay on topic here. So you're arguing that Alberta should logically have upgraders and refiners?
Well, that was the plan under Peter Lougheed. Now, until the 2008 financial disaster, there were plans to build more upgraders and refineries in Alberta. The pipeline mania started after the 2008 financial crisis as investors pulled back on their plans to build refineries and upgraders. And as oil sands investment came back, The investment in upgraders and refineries did not come back. And suddenly you had Keystone Pipeline saying, we'll take solid bitumen and we'll put it in a pipeline. Well, of course, nothing solid is going to flow through a pipeline. So they have to import stuff called diluent and stir it in to create a substance that flows through pipelines to get it to refineries on the Gulf Coast.
So that's why it's called dilbit.
That's right, diluted bitumen.
Diluted bitumen,
dilbit.
Yes.
So it's not a value-added piece, by the way. Dilbit doesn't get you closer to getting it refined. When you get to the refineries, you have to take out the liquidy stuff, the diluent, and you still got solid bitumen, and then you have to upgrade that, and then you put that into a refinery. So back to what happened. First, they wanted to go with Keystone north to south, and even in the 2011 election, people forget, Stephen Harper's political promise was, we will not support shipping bitumen to other countries if their refineries don't meet Canadian environmental standards. So in other words, that translates to, in 2011, Stephen Harper was against shipping bitumen to China.
Wow.
That changed after the 2011 election. And suddenly, because Keystone wasn't getting built, suddenly Stephen Harper had changed of tune and said, okay, well, we want to build Enbridge to go to the West Coast. We want to build Kinder Morgan to go to the West Coast.
What's the financial case for the Kinder Morgan pipeline?
There isn't one.
Then, but investors are putting money into it.
Well, we'll see. They're trying to get investors to put money into it.
They don't have investors yet?
The case is that multinational oil companies already have refineries built in other countries.
So when Kinder Morgan says, we're ready to build, we want to do it right now, are they doing it without investment, on borrowed money?
No, they are calling for investors. They put out the bid. They're looking for people to invest. That happened after they got the permit from the federal government. So the case is really this. Ignoring Peter Lougheed's #1 rule, think like an owner. If you abandon that and go with think like a serf, think like someone who is beholden to transnational oil companies. They will dig it out of the ground. We will help them ship it out of this country as fast as possible for jobs in other countries that pay less. Right? So bitumen being shipped out of Canada is problematic on the economics because, again, they make wild claims that there's a discount because we can't get it to Tidewater. That's all bogus. Robin Allen, who's a very well-respected economist in British Columbia, recently published a piece that took apart the notion that there was a discount because bitumen didn't get to the coast. #1, bitumen is a low-value product. It's a solid. Keep mentioning, it's not even crude oil.
And just last week, down in Louisiana, they mentioned this new offshore, the Louisiana offshore oil port, known as Loop, which
enormous.
The tankers are 2 million barrels instead of 550,000. They take 4 times more oil, which is going to be cheaper, and they're for shipping to China.
Yes, and its question is too, would they take dilbit? Dilbit is a low-value product, no matter how you slice it.
You've got to spend more on it when you get there.
That's right, and if you upgrade it first, well, at least then you've got synthetic crude. Synthetic crude is not getting a discount. It's actually selling at a premium over Western Texas Intermediate. So back to this whole argument. We take it, and the national media takes it, hook, line, and sinker, that it must be in the national interest because environmentalists are against it. So it must be good for the economy if environmentalists are against it. And the reality is, the unions are against it because it will kill more jobs in Canada than it creates. There's no independent study to say it will be good for jobs in Canada. Is it good for Alberta? Well, not compared to having more upgraders and refineries in Alberta than we could be as Canadians. Everyone says we have to get it to market. Well, we're a market. In Canada in the 1970s, we used to have 40 refineries, 40. We now have about 16. And so there's a transition of our economy. There's moving things offshore for our production, but it's not in our long-term interest, even economically, to ship it out raw.
So I know you're like me, that once the switch is on your back on, you will just talk and talk and talk. I want to make sure that we cover the climate aspect of this, the actual dilbit in the ocean, if there's spills aspect of it, the impact on the orcas, some other aspects of it. But have we finished with the financial side of it?
No, we could use the whole half hour pointing out how it doesn't make any economic sense. But the key point is there's no independent study that says it will create more jobs than it kills. And there's no evidence that you wouldn't do better as a country if we thought like a country and stopped importing foreign oil to Atlantic Canada and preferenced using bitumen from Canada in Canada, processed here on a declining basis while we transition off fossil fuels.
So now that the plan is to feed the diluted bitumen through the pipe, put it in the tankers, what happens if there's a tanker accident? And we know that the Exxon Valdez was it was all safe on paper until the captain got drunk, and human error happens, right?
Well, let's start with the Alberta-BC border.
Okay.
Between the Alberta-BC border and the tankers, there are 800 water crossings, streams and rivers and water crossings.
So it's going to be drilled under or pipe above them?
It depends where you're going and how you're treating it. But the pipelines do spring leaks.
Yeah.
We had a very with bitumen and diluent. Our first example, actually the wake-up call that bitumen and diluent behave differently in the environment, was an Enbridge pipeline break in the Kalamazoo River.
Yes, I
and
remember.
that has not to this day been cleaned up.
Yes.
Years later, more than $1 billion spent. And you can't, what happens is because you're mixing in bitumen and diluent in the environment, in fresh water, we know this from the Kalamazoo River, the diluent, which is light, it's a fossil fuel condensate like naphtha.
Yes.
It also has a lot of carcinogens in it. It's the stuff that really began to stink that drew people's attention to the break in Kalamazoo River. So
did they have a pipeline under the river?
Yeah, what was interesting was actually it had all the bells and whistles.
Yes.
So that when it developed a break, it was the control room of Enbridge employees had alarms going off. And just the way we would if we were in our kitchen and there was a piece of toast stuck in the toaster, the staff at Enbridge went around turning off all the alarms because they were convinced that this was a false alarm due to air pressure. One shift left, the next shift came on, the new shift
Human error happens.
They weren't even told that there had been bells and whistles.
But if you've got a pipe underground and it leaks, you're dependent entirely on these electronic signaling thing to tell you it's leaking.
Yeah, but if you ignore them. So in any case, the Enbridge spill, the U.S. investigators in the U.S. government who investigated it said Enbridge had a culture of negligence. Right. In any case, that's what woke us up to the fact that bitumen mixed with diluent doesn't behave like crude in the environment with fresh water.
So you've got 800 creek crossings or river crossings.
Rivers, major rivers.
Wow.
So what happens then is you get to the tanker. What we don't know, we know it won't be cleaned up in fresh water because we have the real life example.
Right.
Can it be cleaned up in the ocean? Well, there are no studies at this point to tell us we know how to clean up bitumen mixed with diluent in a saltwater marine environment.
And if I'm right, that's the specific piece that John Horgan was saying we need more studies on how it can be cleaned up, which Alberta said, you're trying to sabotage the whole thing, on the assumption that they're assuming we don't need to think about that at all, right?
Well, the Kinder Morgan's, I mean, as an intervener in digging through all their evidence, I finally found the thing they were relying on to say that you can clean up bitumen and diluent in the marine environment. They will make this claim with a straight face. The only studies that show you can clean it up have been in large tanks of fresh water in Alberta.
In a controlled environment?
Yeah, to which they've added salt.
And no storms and no tides.
And no salt and no debris. And I mean, no sand, no debris, no bits of, you know, the things that bitumen will form an oil ball around and sink are bits of particulate. So the Department of Fisheries and Oceans did real water testing with seawater in Atlantic Canada and found that bitumen formed around any bit of particulate and created oil balls and sank. But apparently, if you have a tank of water in Alberta that you add salt to and stir, you can float bitumen and diluent on top. So I have no problem if Kinder Morgan wants to spill dilbit into tanks of water in Alberta, but they can't spill it into the Salish Sea and expect to clean it up.
I have to ask, the environmental review process accepted that as an equivalent to the ocean?
They refused to accept the ocean study because they said it came too late and it would be prejudicial to Kinder Morgan to accept it as evidence. So they accepted a one-time only, 10-day study in a tank in Gainford, Alberta, for which none of us as interveners were allowed to cross-examine the people who did that study.
They're expecting full approval and social license from us when there has been no study done of what happens when there's a spill with dilbit.
And worse than that, the Royal Society of Canada, which is Canada's premier scientific academy, did a full literature review of all the studies on bitumen and diluent and concluded, we don't know enough to know how to clean it up. It can't be cleaned up. I attempted to get that introduced as evidence at the National Energy Board Kinder Morgan hearings. And again, the National Energy Board said, this is too late in the process. It wouldn't be fair to Kinder Morgan to accept the Royal Society of Canada study.
So with the previous NEB, and I know it's still the same NEB, but it will be abolished and changed.
Well, it won't be abolished. It'll have a name change.
It'll have a name change.
It'll be called the Canadian Energy Regulator.
Okay, with the current NEB, to what percentage has it been captured by the oil industry?
100%.
100%.
Well, the thing is, the National Energy Board, I used to appear as a lawyer before the National Energy Board as a quasi-judicial body.
Yes.
And it's a regulator that I would respect going in for a hearing as a lawyer. This process I didn't respect because they jettisoned all their normal rules of procedural fairness.
Yes.
Because Harper changed the law and said for the first time the NEB has to do an environmental review. They'd never done them before. And also said these are the timelines. You have to get it done in X amount of time. And so then the NEB said, oh, well, we don't have time to allow cross-examination.
Yes.
So I don't have a problem with the NEB when it did the job it used to do as a regulator.
Right.
It should never be doing environmental assessments. Those should be done by entities that understand environmental review.
What about the people who say, well, we can ship it by rail?
That's good, actually. Shipping bitumen by rail is 100% safe.
It still gets to a tanker, of course, and you've got the ocean
Yes,
problem.
but if you're shipping your bitumen by rail, you don't mix it with diluent.
Oh.
It makes no sense. So what they do is they warm up the bitumen enough to get it into a rail car. Now, there's greenhouse gas implications here, obviously, because you have to warm it up. But once it gets in the rail car, it solidifies.
Yes.
You don't warm it up again until the other end. So stick with me on this, Guy. This is mind-blowing.
You've got to cook the rail car.
But bitumen in a rail car, if
Solid.
it were to fall off a high precipice and crash open in a stream, would lie there like a lump.
They got a big chunk of dead body.
And it would not be, it can't be like lac mégantic. Antique.
Okay.
You can't make this stuff blow up. I've talked to guys in the oil sands who've tried a blowtorch on bitumen just to see if they can get it to catch fire.
Right.
In its solid form, it just lies there like a lump.
Yes.
But we're always given this threat of, oh, and Justin Trudeau said it just the other day to Bill Nye, pipelines are safer than rail. That is absolutely, it's true if you're shipping the stuff that blew up in lac mégantic. If you're shipping Bakken shale, it'll blow up.
Right, because it's liquid.
That's right. And it's also full of volatile organics because they frack the oil in the Bakken region. So there's lots of toxics
but if
in there.
it came by rail, hypothetically, which no one's talking about.
Well, it does right now come by rail all the time to ports.
The bitumen does.
And solid bitumen.
And then they heat it up.
And they heat it up, take it out. If you're shipping it solid, there's no, well, it makes no sense because you're adding a lot of greenhouse gases to ship it to a refinery in another country.
Right.
But in terms of safety...
But you still got the tanker problem if there's a tanker spill.
No, you still have no problem. If you're solid bitumen, it can't go anywhere. It just sinks.
You ship the solids in the tanker all the way to China then?
If you did that, but they don't want to. They want to ship it mixed with diluent to make it impossible to clean up.
Okay.
It's a very frustrating issue.
Very briefly, the people who are concerned about orcas and the noise of the tankers?
Well, there's lots to be concerned about with southern resident killer whale population. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans evidence that the NEB did accept was that the increase, the seven-fold increase in tankers, the noise alone would be devastating to our southern resident killer whales.
And we're down to 50 or some?
We're 70, but it's down, we're losing, they're not calving. The state of Washington, Governor Inslee of Washington has said he doesn't want to see Kinder Morgan built, specifically because of the threat to the southern resident killer whales. So we have to, I mean, that's one of the court cases that we may yet win. We have court cases also on Indigenous rights that the Tsleil-Waututh and the Musqueam and Squamish have brought. And of course the City of Vancouver and City of Burnaby are in court. Any one of those court cases can stop Kinder Morgan in its tracks.
So I know that most of the people who share our concern about this are simultaneously concerned about oil spills and about the climate impact.
Right.
And I know the climate impact wasn't allowed to be discussed at the NEB, but tell me about the climate impact of all this.
Well, the climate impact is really interesting. The only environmental assessment that I know of that's done a good job in looking at the linkage between pipelines, climate, and the price of a barrel of oil. These things are sensitive to price. And this was the one done by the U.S. State Department on Keystone Pipeline. So some people said, oh, well, the U.S. flip-flopped because it was reported in Canada that the environmental assessment on Keystone had said there was no impact on greenhouse gases if we build Keystone. That was based on an assumption when oil was selling for over $100 a barrel.
Yes.
As long as oil is selling at over $100 or even over $90 a barrel, there's going to be pressure to open up more oil sands projects because they can make money.
Right.
As soon as a barrel of bitumen or oil is selling at $30, anything under $50 a barrel, you're losing money.
Yes. But the Alberta climate plan is to expand the oil sands production.
Well, that's right. But before I get to that, just to say that building a pipeline when the price of a barrel of oil is low creates upward pressure on expanding production and increasing greenhouse gases that would not be there based on market conditions when the price of a barrel of oil is low.
Oh, interesting.
Add to that the fake climate plan of the government of Alberta, which Justin Trudeau and Catherine McKenna are so happy about, would take us from a current level of production that produces about 70 megatons a year of greenhouse gases from Alberta.
That's 70 million tons of greenhouse gas,
In their so-called climate plan, they'd put a cap that would be 30 megatons more than is
Yes.
currently produced. So their cap is at 100 million tons of greenhouse gases a year out of Alberta. And frankly, on market conditions, we're never likely to hit that cap.
Right.
So it's a climate plan that's essentially fraudulent to say that we should be celebratory over a cap on greenhouse gases that involves growth in emissions.
So there's viewers who are still confused on climate change and stuff like that. And we know that we need to keep the temperature absolutely below 2-degree increase and ideally at below 1.5-degree increase. Yes. How does expanding LNG in BC and then oil sands play into keeping the temperature from giving us a horrendously catastrophic future?
It doesn't. These two things are mutually exclusive. So if you're serious about climate change, then you have to say, and I'm not, by the way, arguing to shut down the oil sands right away tomorrow. I know some people do, but not in the Green Party. We're saying, look, let's have a transition, and let's think about whether a barrel of bitumen will be more valuable in 30 years as feedstocks to petrochemicals than to something we burn. I mean, let's just think about it, and let's have a plan. So number one, we should have an energy plan for Canada. We should think about energy security for Canada so that we're not dependent on foreign imports. We should have a plan that maximizes the number of jobs for every resource we're dealing with. We should maximize our jobs in Canada first. When you take all those things into account, you'd never be talking about pipelines to ship out raw bitumen. And in terms of the climate content, you'd be saying, let's break these things down. If we want to get our maximum bang for buck in shutting down greenhouse gases out of Alberta, the first place to go is to stop burning coal for electricity.
Yes.
Green tech jobs in Canada already create more jobs than the oil sands, already.
Right.
So when you look at it, and I know climate change is overwhelming for people, so I think just two things. Think about two things. Get carbon out of producing electricity.
Yes.
And then get rid of the internal combustion engine.
Yes.
And run our cars on electricity. Run our mass transit on electricity, but do it with we now have storage. That's the big thing about renewables. People say, well, the sun doesn't shine every day, the wind doesn't blow every day. That's right. You store it.
There are cities in Europe where Barcelona is going to 100% electric buses, I think, by 2020. Hamburg's planning the same. There are ferries in Norway, 100% electric. Yeah. Norway's already 50% of all their new cars are electric now because they give you free parking and various things like that.
And just the way they work together. So, for instance, Denmark has more wind power than it can use.
Yes.
And it would blow their circuits if they tried to use it. On a very, very windy day in Denmark, they can't put all that electricity into their grid. Yeah. So they sell it to Norway.
Yes.
Norway stores it by using the power from the windmills in Denmark to pump water up into existing reservoirs. Yeah. Those are that's stored. Yes. And then when they need it, they open the sluices and they have hydro when they need it. So they control renewable energy by storing it. There's a lot of, as of course, Elon Musk, there's a lot of just revolutions in batteries.
We've only got 5 minutes left, so kind of quick shift here. You're friends, I know, with a lot of other MPs.
Yeah.
You make a point about having good relationships with them.
I do.
And without naming any names, how many of them do you feel would love to be able to be excited about the vision of a transition to renewable energy and tackle the climate thing properly? And how many are just totally believing the oil sands line?
Oh, the vast majority would like to see us move in a good climate direction, for sure.
So what stops it happening then?
Partly that 10 years of Stephen Harper being Prime Minister has resulted in a sort of cultural change within civil service. Oh. A lot of people who served that master still think what they did was good. Oh. So it's hard to get good advice to the Minister of Environment or the Minister of Natural Resources. I mean, I have friends in the mining industry who gripe about the fact that under Harper, the Department of Natural Resources became the Department of Oil and Gas.
So under Trudeau, and a lot of us were excited and positive about Trudeau, how does the Ministry of Environment and Climate, how are they tackling the task?
Badly, inefficiently, without gusto.
So
they don't
the Minister, McKenna, is...
She would take good advice if she got good advice. I don't think she gets good advice. So you have a department, and then a lot of people, you know, it's hard because they're feeling congratulatory and complacent.
Do you get a chance to sit down with her one-on-one?
Often. But here's the thing. When she came to Paris, and she did a great job at the climate negotiations in Paris in December 2015, she said, the Harper target is the floor. It's weak. We can do much better.
Yes.
Within a year, she accepted the Harper target and said it was ambitious and the best we could do.
So do you think it's other people around the cabinet table who are pressuring her, or is that
I think it was the department.
Her own staff in there?
Yeah. I think that...
She can't just change her staff?
No. And this was... backing up again, this was an
Yes.
admirable thing that Trudeau said to all his ministers, we're going to respect the nonpartisan professional civil service. So there wasn't a broom that came in and moved people out.
Okay.
Now, think
yes.
about this. The Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate was negotiated by her deputy minister, who had just developed a few months earlier the Harper Target on Climate, which he then defended. And the provinces didn't want to see anything more ambitious.
So do you think she has daily tussles with the bureaucrats, or does she just sort of...
She used to. I think she's given up.
She's given up, you think?
I'm being very candid, considering I'm on a
yes.
TV show.
Yes.
I like her very much. I think she'd like to do
What
more.
more support does she need?
She needs the Canadian public to say, what the heck? Excuse me, you're
Yes.
the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and you're trying to tell us that building pipelines
Yes,
and protecting climate go hand in hand?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us the one about how you can go on a diet, lose weight, and all you do is eat
Yes,
chocolate
so
cake?
she needs more support from us too.
We need to call the government on nonsense. When they say we can build pipelines for
Yes.
fossil fuels and meet our climate change targets,
Yes.
Canadians who know better need to say, excuse me, we know that's baloney. Will you please give us a real climate
So
plan?
what about Canada's non-profits, the environmental non-profits? That should be...
It depends on the group. I think, locally here in Victoria, we know that we get Dogwood, Sierra Club BC.
Yes.
They are tough.
Right.
But I have to say a lot of the national groups over the period of time under Harper are so relieved that it's not Stephen Harper anymore that they're not pushing. And you don't do Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or Minister Catherine McKenna any favors if you sit back and let the only voices that are heard be those that say you're not paying enough attention to protecting fossil fuels.
1 minute left, straight to camera. Go for it.
Go to.
Go straight to camera. Say,
Well,
you've got a
just
minute.
to say, for Canadians who care about these issues, which I think is most of us, our government needs help, and they need the help of an engaged and informed citizenry that says we want real climate action. We can see that when there's a heat wave over the Arctic, when there hasn't been any sun shining there for months, and the temperatures in the Arctic are 25 degrees Celsius above normal, we're in trouble. And if we want to save our children and our grandchildren from an unlivable world, that means that we move off fossil fuels much more rapidly than any government is currently proposing. And Canadians could lead the way.
I always think Canada's more like Europe than like America in many ways.
Many ways.
We could be a leader in transition. Well, look, Elizabeth, you've been an MP for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, 7.
You've been an environmental leader for 107 years.
I know, I feel like well, those of us who are elders,
yes.
What drives me is I'm really hoping I don't die before I'm sure my grandkids have a livable world.
Well, so many of us want to thank you for all that. So our time has run out on us. That's a limited resource. So my guest has been Elizabeth May, leader of Canada's Green Party. My name's Guy Dauncey. This has been the show Change the World. One of my small contributions is this novel I wrote called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, set in Vancouver in the year 2032, when all these wonderful things are already happening or have already happened. We're already on 100% renewable energy.
And thank you for making me a Prime Minister fictitiously.
That's right. You're
It's
quite
a good
right.
one.
Yes. So if you enjoyed the show, tune in next week for more, and thanks for watching.